We're still continuing to work on our lesson plan. You've already picked your content standards, figured out your essential questions and your big ideas, and you should have been able to identify your learning context. The next thing is your learning outcomes. Let's talk about what learning objectives are not. They're not goals, they're not instructional strategies, and they're not content standards. What this means is you first come up with your content standards, then you come up with your learning objectives, and then to reach those learning objectives, you need to develop some instructional strategies to be able to achieve your goals. Once you pick your content standards, the learning objective is the ultimate destination. How will your instruction, your assessments, your activities, everything you do get you to the content standard? The learning objective is what gets you there. Ultimately, it is the focus of the lesson. It defines what your students should be able to do. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the ABCDs of a learning objective. First of all, you always have to have an audience. Who are you teaching? And you will see that it always will be students will be able to. Next is behavior. It's a verb. What will your students be able to do? And those behaviors are usually taken off either Webb's Depth of Knowledge or Bloom's Taxonomy. And then C is for condition. Given what? What are they going to do to this thing? This behavior to some sort of condition. And then finally, degree. How do you know they've achieved the goal? I need a quantitative analysis on how did they achieve the goal. Did they get 100%? Did they get 3 out of 4? Did they memorize? Audience is always your learners. In our context, it's K-12 students. We teach either elementary, middle school, or high school. So therefore, whether it's kindergarten or they're a senior in high school, our audience is always going to be students. And you will write, students will be able to. And the question next is, what will they be able to do? I believe that finding the behavior is probably the most important aspect of the ABCDs of the learning objectives. In fact, I think it's the hardest as well. First of all, you're picking a verb, and usually the verbs come from either Bloom's Taxonomy or Webb's Depth of Knowledge. But a taxonomy is a classification of knowledge. What will people be thinking? What will they be learning? What will they be understanding? These are the two most popular taxonomies. There are others, but these two are the ones that are prevalent in schools of education. It was developed last century, and in fact, Webb's Depth of Knowledge has been much more prevalent in the last 10 years. You will see that remember is at the top. Remembering is the lowest level of thinking. It's basically being able to review facts, terms, concepts. So when you're selecting verbs, you're going to pick things like find, define, omit, name, what, when, where, recall. The next level is understand, and it's a little bit more complex. It's basically understanding of facts by organizing, comparing, interpreting, giving descriptions. And then the verbs are such as classify, compare and contrast, explain, interpret, show, summarize, translate. This is a little bit more complex. The next one is apply. In a sense, you're applying to solve problems to new situations. You take information that you have and you apply it to other situations. So you're constructing knowledge. You'll use verbs such as identify, model, organize, plan, solve, choose, build. The next level is analyze. In this context, you're breaking things down. You're identifying parts through motives, through causes, and making inferences. You'll use verbs such as classify, contrast, discover, distinguish, examine, inference, list, motive, simplify, trying to figure out what the theme is. The next level is evaluate. I like to call this the critical thinking one because you have to defend a point of view. You're making a judgment. You're determining the validity of arguments and ideas. And so therefore your verbs are going to be such as choose, assess, agree, estimate, explain, interpret, judge, justify, perceive, prove, recommend, select, or value. The final one is create. It is the highest order of thinking. In this one, you're asking students to build something new from what they've learned. And verbs are such as build, change, construct, design, develop, formulate, imagine, improve, maximize, modify, predict, solve, and test. On the right, you see Webb's depth of knowledge. You'll see the similarities in colors, but you'll see there's only 4 categories: recall, skill or concept, strategic thinking, and extended thinking. We're going to use Webb's depth of knowledge to elaborate a little more on how these verbs affect learning objectives in the next slide. In this slide, we are going over Webb's depth of knowledge. But please note, what we're doing here, we can also do with Bloom's. I find that it's easier to explain Webb's depth of knowledge with what we're about to talk about when it comes to learning objectives. Typically in a unit, you can have anywhere from 3 to 10 or even more lessons. However, developmentally, your first lesson should be lower level thinking versus your final lesson, which be higher order thinking. So think about your unit, how many lesson plans you have, and what kind of learning objectives are you going to develop over time. So for example, in your first lesson, you may want to have low hanging fruit or low level order thinking. Maybe in your first lesson plan, you should have a second learning objective that is a little bit more developmentally rigorous, such as your level 2, where once they have these factual information, they should be able to distinguish one from another. They should be able to modify it, predict, organize, identify patterns. Then you have probably in your lesson 2 and lesson 3, you should be able to move up to your level 3, all the while reviewing your level 1, your level 2. So about your lesson 3 and 4, you should be able to come up with more depth of understanding, such as they should do strategic thinking. They should be able to revise, draw conclusions, cite evidence, differentiate. And then finally, the 4th level. That's where they should be able to take everything they've used from this unit plan, from lesson 1 or all the way to lesson 10, and be able to critique, analyze, synthesize, construct, design. Once you determine what your students are going to be doing, the question is, what are they going to be doing it to? What will the students be given? In a sense, you have to have something they're doing it to, like a noun. So for example, you can say given. Well, what are they given? They're given 7 math problems, a text to read, a soccer ball to bounce. In a sense, you have to have a behavior that's going to be associated with a condition. What are they going to do? Are they going to analyze, which is your verb, a text? Are they going to solve math problems? Are they going to dribble a soccer ball? The next one is degree. It's the one that's most often forgotten when doing the ABCDs of learning objective. You need to quantify your results. How do you know how well they've succeeded? Is it 100%? Is it 3 out of 4? You have to quantify your results. The next one is, how do we put it all together? The ABCDs. You will see in the first one, it says given 10 quadratic equations. That's your condition. Students will be able to, your audience, solve. That is your behavior. And then their success rate is 9 out of 10 correctly. The next ones, students will be able to, that is your audience. Write the names, that is your behavior. All 50 states on the map of the U.S., that is your condition. And your degree is 80% accuracy. The next one is, given a paragraph, students will be able to identify the topic sentence with no errors. Given that is your condition, students will be able to, audience, identify. Well, what are they going to identify? The topic sentence. That is their behavior. And then the degree is no errors. And finally, students will be able to recognize all the musical terms, staff, note types, treble clef, and notes treble staff notes in a sheet of music. Students will be able to is your audience. Recognize is your verb. And then you have that list of things that they will have to know. And the condition is given a sheet of music. And the question is, well, what's the degree? Notice it says all. So therefore you have the ABCDs. Let's put it all together. You will notice that each one has an audience. Students will be able to. Each one has a verb selected from either Bloom's or Webb's depth of knowledge. Each one has a condition, a given that. And finally, each one has a quantifiable measure for their D, for degree. The scary part about learning objectives is putting it on the blank paper, but trust me, starting out something new and different is hard. You just got to do it, because the beauty is setting it aside, coming back later, and editing when you have greater understanding.